Alright guys, so I'm back with another video. I'm going to be going back over this entire project, and this first part of the project I'm just going to be talking about the basics. I'll go over the animation system and setup in another video because it's going to be a fairly long video trying to explain the animation side of it. So getting started, I wanted to put this out there that this project is only meant for educational purposes, but you're free to use it however you wish. It's going to be an MIT license. As you can see, if you can go to the GitHub if you're wondering about that. But basically, I don't care if you use it in commercial or whatever. You can build your projects off of this. And I'm going to go over the features and the input. So let me just go ahead and get started here. So if I press the 1 key, it puts them back in this right here, what you have here. Now I have sped up the turn in place system. I'll go over how to set that back how it was in a later video, and how to adjust it. But if you press the 2 key, you'll see the pistol. I have a recoil animation, and right now I just have a placeholder reload animation that I got from Lyra. Some of these animations have different sources. Some of them I made myself. I'll go over the ones I made myself. So the actual pistol aiming and the pistol aiming stuff and the rifle aiming stuff, I did those myself. If you see that green line is pointing from the end of the barrel where the bullet comes out of, and it's pointing from there to the center of the screen. The blue line is pointing straight down the barrel of the rifle. That is a debugger, and you'll see that it's printing out some numbers up here. Those numbers are angular offsets from the center, and that allows you to judge how offset it is whenever you're setting up your live retargeted characters. I'll go ahead and put this out there, guys. Whenever it comes to bringing in your own custom characters, there's no way around it. Differing anatomies will cause offsets, especially when it comes to aiming things precisely. The aim will not be in the same place. It'll not be aiming in the same direction as it is on this character. And I have addressed this issue, and I'll cover that here later. But right now, I'm just going to go over the features. So again, I have a reload specifically for this rifle. Well, not for this rifle, actually. It came from Lyra. So I may make my own reload animations later and replace those Lyra ones. But Lyra is basically like, you can use Lyra animations in Unreal Engine in your own projects. They don't care. The sounds came from KD. You'll find him on my Discord. This is the guy right here. He provided the sounds, and he set up the initial weapon logic, replicated weapon logic, and one of the first versions. I've made a lot of changes to it though, simply because I've changed the way things work in here a lot, which is why I'm redoing this video. So if you press R, of course, that reloads. If you press N, he'll do a little dance right there. That's just an example. I actually have to fix that, come to think of it. There is a slight problem whenever he comes out of it. I'll have to fix that. It looks weird when he comes out of it. That has to do with the layering and how it's blending out of that layering data into this other layering data, I'm assuming, is probably the reason why. I'll look into it and fix it at a later date. But that was just an example of how you can change the layering settings on montages. It doesn't actually look bad whenever you do it from the pistol. So it's probably because of the pose that it's blending into that it ends up looking weird. Also, that pose doesn't end in the idle pose, which is another reason why. And so, yeah, so you can't make it blend out into the idle pose. That's just a limitation of animation systems. I may devise some way of maybe trying to work around that a little bit later. But right now, I have not been able to achieve footlocking in here with the offset root bone node that they're using, and I'll explain that later in the video, probably towards the end, and why that's causing problems for us. Also, you'll see that whenever the turn happens, the weapon kind of jitters. The reason why is because of the offset root bone. We don't have any control over how the offset root bone interpolates, like the speed at which it interpolates, and we don't have access to much information on the stuff that it's doing. So it makes it a little complicated. I'll go into that in more detail later. But anyway, moving on. If you press 4 on the keyboard, you'll go into this mode, and it may. So you've seen the first time that I changed, it did some kind of weird jitter. I think that's a bug. It happens in other circumstances too, but I'm pretty sure that's some kind of bug. But anyway, you'll see we have a fighting stance here, and right now we only have one punch. I made the punch myself. It's only an in-place punch, so right now you can't punch while you're running. I will make one later. I only just made that punch right there Friday, and added it Friday night, I believe. But yeah, so I'll make some more. I'll make a left hand punch, and then I'll make some for when he's running. But anyway, moving on. That's 4 on your keyboard. So right now I don't have anything blocking the reload. Whenever you're in here, I'll have to fix that. That's obviously something we don't want. I do not have a holster either. So whenever he mantles, he'll mantle with the weapon. You cannot shoot while you're mantling or vaulting. But just as soon as you're done, it'll start shooting again. Now, this system is mostly replicated, but there may be some problems with the replication in some areas. I have added some stuff, and I mostly work on this with the no replication, guys, and the reason why is because motion matching isn't actually natively supported for replication in Unreal yet. And 5.5 they will be bringing that. And right now I've been using a plugin that somebody made, but I don't include it in the project, and so I have to add it to the project before I can test it with replication. So there may be some stuff that I might add at some point, and it won't work properly with replication because I haven't tested it yet. As soon as 5.5 comes out and the game animation sample project is properly replicated, I will bring those changes over to this project, and then we won't have to worry about it anymore. So I'm just letting you guys know ahead of time. So this Git repository is costing me money, guys. It's probably costing me about $50 a month. So, I mean, $5 isn't much, and if somebody wants to donate $5 or whatever, you can give me a super thanks here on YouTube, or you can go to that buy me a coffee thing, which is preferable because YouTube takes like something crazy. I think they take like over 25%, I think, of the money. I think it's like 25% or more that they take if you do a super links on YouTube, which is why I do not recommend super links. It's ridiculous. YouTube takes like a good portion of it. Anyway, so if you do want to help with the repo, you can get you can go to buy me a coffee, and I use most of that money, and most of the money that I get from these videos actually is what I've been using to support that GitHub. So I'm not really making any money on it. Anyway, so I've basically went over all the features as far as this right here, but let me go over here and show you this. So if you come over here to the game animation widget and you walk over this, it'll bring this stuff up right here. Now, stuff like this one, like all characters, I have not set up. The sandbox retarget showcase mannequins, I have not set up, but all these other ones are set up. And so if you change to them, you'll see that they're firing pretty accurately. Now, just so you know, the reason why he's shooting below and above and then below, it's because I'm actually additively applying a breathing over the top of this to make it look more alive. That way it doesn't look so stiff and unnatural. But in doing so, it also causes it to be slightly inaccurate because, as you can see, the gun is moving up and down. As you can see, it's moving, the barrel is angling up and then angling back down. And that's the reason why. Now this one's pretty accurate. In fact, you can't even really tell that he's breathing. That might be a bad thing, I guess, in some cases, but he isn't moving. And when he's moving, it's a lot more noticeable. Now on the pistol, I kind of got this a little bit more intense on the pistol. So, and you'll notice that the interpolation on the hand right there is a little weird. That's another bug I'll have to fix so that whenever he goes to aim, it doesn't look weird. It doesn't look like it's floating. Right now it does, but I'll fix that later. Now I had to adjust this for each of these characters, for each of the poses. The relaxed pose, oh, it looks like this got broke. Okay, I'll have to fix that again. So I don't know what's actually breaking this. I keep noticing it breaking, and what may have happened is I may have went in there and recompiled, or I might have missed this. I think I fixed, yeah, so I think I missed it. Let's see. If it's fixed on this one, then it was broken on the other one and I didn't realize it. Yeah, so whenever I was going through here fixing the hand placement for each of these characters, I must have missed some of them, her being one of them. I thought I had gotten all of them. Let's see if I missed him too. No, I got him. So I'll explain how the live retargeting works here in a minute. But before I get to live retargeting, I want to explain how all of this works for the main character here. And so anytime you have any of these characters right here, and I'm pressing Shift plus F1 to eject from the viewport so that I can have my mouse back and click on these. But whenever, if you need to find one of these real quickly, there's two ways. You can go under here and go to the blueprints, retargeted characters, and you can select one from here. Or you can just eject from the viewport by pressing Shift F1 and then pressing the eject button. Or you can just press F8 on your keyboard. So if I press F8 on the keyboard, it just ejects me. And then I can right click and go to edit. And that'll open up the blueprint for that character. Since this is the main character right here, this is the main blueprint. And that blueprint isn't under here. It's actually under the main blueprints folder. And that would be this one right here. All my stuff is under the DAO folders. At least under the blueprints DAO. That's where most of the stuff is. And the animations are under UEFN Mannequin, Animations, DAO Anims. That's where all my animation stuff is under here. Oh, I actually didn't show you something. So let me just go ahead. So there's two, right now I just have him kind of blending it back into the idle and then turning, but I may replace that with custom turns later. Here's an easy to replicate turn in place system, and this actually, I'm pressing G on my keyboard, and what it's actually doing is it's motion warping. It's playing an animation and it's motion warping to face the camera. So that's one, and I made these animations, by the way. Two of them. There's a left one and there's a right one. So that was just an ideal I had. You don't have to use that one. In fact, if you're turning in place rapidly, then this probably wouldn't be ideal because you'd be constantly hopping and it would look funny. But anyway, it's an option. So I do not have that set up to happen automatically based on angle. Right now, you have to press G on the keyboard. So before I actually go over the character blueprint, I'm going to go over the input. So this is how you can find out what the inputs are. If you go under input, you have an input mapping context. And that's what all of the input mappings are mapped. This is where input actions are mapped to keys. Or I guess you could say keys are mapped to input actions. And under the input actions, we have two folders, locomotion. And this is where all the regular locomotion stuff is. And then I added an actions folder. And I put the aim, crouch, interact, pistol, reload, rifle, so on and so forth under here. And by default, some of these, they're just given one key. So if you need them to work for a gamepad, you would need to currently, in its current state, you would need to set this up yourself for your gamepad. But I will likely improve my approach to these inputs, these input actions later, so that they're more appropriate for a gamepad, and it'll be easy to change back and forth. So right now I just have input actions for specific actions. In the future, I probably won't have that. I'll probably have a way devised so that you can cycle through them rather than having each action related to a custom input. setup. Either that, or I'll just have generic actions here, and then I will have input mapping contexts loaded for specific things like weapons. But anyway, that's the input system. So in the character blueprint, that's where all the weapon stuff is handled mostly, and the replication, and I'll go over that. So I'm just going to close all tabs to the right, and I'll open up the event graph, and you'll see I have the original logic here, the AO logic, and KD weapon add-on. I've changed this so much that you wouldn't recognize it much compared to when he added it, but I left it in that folder regardless. Some of the stuff on here has changed ever so slightly due to the fact that I replicated it. And I did add a few things. So, for example, this right here, this updates the held object offset. So you can create data assets that store a held object offset. And the reason why I use data assets is because there's a trick that you can do with data assets where you can change the values of a data asset during runtime and watch how it offsets things. And the good thing about data assets is that although you can't update data assets during runtime in a compiled build, you can in the editor, and it'll reflect that. But it will only reflect that if you're running it on a tick where you're updating the data asset stuff every tick. So that's basically what I'm doing here. So the held object system, before I actually get into that, let me explain to you over here. In the functions, you'll see all my stuff is under DAO. The stuff that KD added is under KD. And same for over here for the variables. I did add some macros. I did not put them under a DAO section, but that's because there's very few macros as is. I did set up some interfaces here. And I'll go over all that. So the on-rep stuff cannot be categorized. As you can see, graph is not editable. So I cannot put those under a category, unfortunately. It just won't let me, as you can see. But anyway, I'm just going to go ahead and get started with the held object information. So the held object is what the weapons get set to. It requires a skeletal mesh asset. If you have a static mesh, if I can find one, I will give you an example. If you have a static mesh, you can right click on it and you can convert it to a skeletal mesh right here. And normally you want the root bone placement to be at the origin, but you can do bottom, center, and center as well, depending on your needs. So by default, that's not possible. But in this project, I actually have the skeletal mesh editing tools enabled. That's the reason why if you do it in this project, then it'll have this right here. In a new project, you would have to enable that plugin in order to get this convert to skeletal mesh. So if you convert it to skeletal mesh, then you'll be able to load it in here and it'll treat it as a skeletal mesh. I don't think there's much overhead related to that, but in most cases, you actually want weapons to be skeletal meshes. And the reason why is because you want to be able to create animations where the character and the weapon are synchronized, and you can play both of those animations at the same time. So that, for example, if he's cocking, you know, the pistol, or if he's pulling the magazine clip out, then you'll actually see it coming out of the rifle. But anyway. So right here on begin play, I'm actually caching the relative transform of this held object. And if you select it, you'll see this right here is its relative offset. That offset, or that location, is its offset from this mesh, which it's a child of. So in this case, it would actually be the weapon R bone on the character. On this update held object offset function, what I'm doing is I'm just adding the offset from that primary data asset. I'm getting the socket offset location from the primary data asset, and I'm adding it to that reference pose. And I'm adding the two rotations by using the combined rotator. And then I'm setting the relative transform to be that new location. And that basically translates to, if I load up one of these guys here, and yeah, I need to fix that interpolation on there. It just looks a little weird. So if I come over here and go under DAO, actually, I'll show you inside of here. So if we go under the variables, we go under DAO held object, and let's see. I may not have fixed that back for him. Yeah. Okay, I did. So under the overlay data right here, it holds the pistol and it holds action data. Later on, I'll probably replace this with an actual weapon system where you can pick up the weapons and it'll grab this action data from the weapon itself, from the weapon blueprint. But right now, it's actually being stored in this structure, this array of structures. And if you open this up, you'll see that we have, there's multiple different types of action data assets here. If I browse to that, you'll see there's a weapon one, a fight one, and then there's a base one. The fight and the weapon share the variables that are on the base, but they each have variables of their own. Some of them are similar, some of them are different. So, for example, this one, it only added a punch action montage. This one does not have, well, actually, it has the same stuff as this other one. It's just called something different. But later on, what will probably end up happening is this one right here will actually have a combo system set up for it. Right now, I just have an array of action montages. And later on, it will not be an array of montages. It'll be set up differently. This one takes a single animation. This one takes an array. And then for the punches, it just right now, currently, it just randomly chooses one from this array. So it seems I was mistaken. I have changed a lot of stuff in here, which is why I'm doing this. So I just remembered that I actually kept the held object stuff separate. So it's actually stored in a separate variable called held object offset. And the reason why I made it separate from that action data is because I don't believe it's appropriate for a weapon to keep track of how a character is going to hold the weapon. And so each character will have its own held object offset. And that character will be responsible for setting this held object offset based on the weapon tag. And that's the reason why I switched over to gameplay tags, so that it would be easier to manage stuff like that. The thing about gameplay tags is that you can actually handle those without having to get a reference to something. So it doesn't require you to cast to a character blueprint, which is why I switched over to gameplay tags. And also because the GAS gameplay ability system requires it, and a lot of people are going to want to use GAS with this project. So I wanted to make sure I supported it. So I actually don't have a data asset set up for. Oh yeah, I do. I just didn't hook it back up. So DAHOD is actually for held object data. That's kind of a legacy thing. When I originally set this up, I was calling it held object data instead of offset. But then I decided that I wasn't going to combine the actual weapon data with the weapon itself, with the action data. So some things are going to change, but anyway. So with this loaded, I should be able to, with this set here, I should be able to go in here and eject. And if I go back over to this and I expand this socket offset, you'll see that I can adjust it in real time because it's a data asset that's being updated on a tick. It allows me to update it in real time. So these rotations don't like you going backwards. They don't like negative numbers. So you could just wrap back around like this and just drag all the way over to the right. It will wrap around to negative 180 and then interpolate down to 0. So if you try to drag it to the left at 0, it won't do anything. For this character, I didn't actually need an offset for the pistol. So that's how the held object offset works. So I've briefly discussed the overlay data for the weapons. It's an array. It's a map. And the reason why I chose a map dictionary is because we can look up via gameplay tag. So we can say, hey, grab me the value for this gameplay tag. And that would look something like this. So if I get this and I drag off of here and I say find, it'll find the value associated with the provided key. In this case, the provided key is a gameplay tag. So this right here would get me the data. It would give me this structure right here, which holds the mesh and the action data currently. And so if I break this, you'll see I have mesh and action data. And another good thing about having that stuff stored under a primary data asset is you can actually check if it's valid. So you can do an is valid off of it to see if they've been assigned action data. So that's how that works. Now I'll go over the gameplay tags so that you understand that better. If we go under Blueprints DAO, and let's see, data, you'll see this GTDAO states. And if you open it up, it's just a bunch of information. Now, this DAO right here is the beginning, and any sub-tree, sub-entry under DAO has to be preceded with DAO dot, and any sub-entry under held objects has to be preceded with DAO dot held object dot, and so on and so forth. And I'll show you how you set that up. So if you open up the project settings and go to gameplay tags, under the gameplay tag table list, you can add an entry here, and you can select a data table if it's the right kind of data table. It has to be a data table of type gameplay tags, and I'll show you how to create one. But after you've added this right here, you can go to manage gameplay tags, and they will show up under here just as you entered them into here. And the tooltips, that's the dev comment. So if you actually want to create one, you would right click and go to miscellaneous, and you would go to data table and expand this. And right here at the top, you'll see gameplay tag table row. You would create that. I'm just going to delete this. I wanted to show you how that's done and handled. So I'm just going to close out of some of this for now. I may change some of this stuff at a later date. For example, right here, you'll see that if this action is fired on this character, it calls a server RPC. That's what this is called. It's called a server RPC. And it's just a custom event that has been set up to replicate, or under replicates to run on server. And this is considered a server RPC. And normally you want it to be set to reliable. If it's a one-shot, you want it to be set to reliable. If it's something that's going to be spammed, you probably want it to be unreliable. And so you want to check reliable. By default, reliable is not checked. I'm not going to go into too much depth on this, but basically the server, you normally don't want the server to call a server RPC because it's meaningless. If you see two spheres right here next to one of these variables, it means that it's been set to replicate. Some of these are replicated with a rep notify. A rep notify is associated with these functions right here, which start with onRep. So that basically says that whenever that variable called traversal result is replicated, whenever the server updates the traversal result variable, then this function right here gets fired on all machines connected to the network. Client, server, dedicated server, they'll all fire this. So that's the crash course on replication. I'm not going to go into any more detail on that. If we go back to the event graph, under DAO logic, you'll see the logic that I set up here. And I just set up a kind of helper function for playing montages, and this is mostly for just to serve as an example primarily. But you can set a layering setting right here, and right now this one is using a reload layering setting, and I'll go over this in the animation video. But if you open one up and you move your mouse cursor over it, you'll see they have tooltips that somewhat explain what they're for. And I tried to name them so that they're easier to understand. Depending on the situation, you may want some of this stuff to be done a little bit differently. I'll go over all that in the animation video. I'm not going to go into that in this one, but that's a data asset. And you'll see that I have one for the emote as well. So this is probably why it looked funny, is because I had it in mesh space right here. But this should probably be base, and then this should probably be in mesh space. Let's say, let's just try 0.5, and then maybe 0.75. So 1 would be 100%, 0 would be 0%, 0.5 would be 50%. And let's see if this makes it look a little bit better. Yeah, I think so. Now, of course, it doesn't end in the right pose, but I didn't design it to, I just brought it over. Now, it still looks a little weird at the end. It could just be the animation, perhaps. I don't know. I think it's a mixture of the animation and blending back into these settings. So I'll look into that at a later date. But anyway. So I'm taking my time with this, guys, because there's a lot going on in here and I don't want to miss anything. And I want to make sure that I cover everything. People are constantly complaining about the documentation on this because it's changing so much. But I think it's in a fairly stable state now. I know I've said that multiple times before, but I don't know how else I could change it any more drastically than I did that last time when I swapped out these were enums, but now they're gameplay tags. And so I had to change a lot of stuff to make that happen. So this is what I was talking about before. As you can see on the unarmed custom, if it's a client, it just fires the server RPC. If it's the server, then it doesn't fire a server RPC. It just fires this instead of this. So the difference is that it's not, the server isn't telling the server to execute this, which is probably a little bit faster to do it like this than to have the server call this on itself. So whenever this gets updated, you'll see it's set with the notify. And that is bound to this right here. And when this executes, what it's doing is it's getting that overlay data. It's getting the mesh and the action data. It's loading the mesh right here. It's caching the overlay data right here. And then it's getting the mesh off of it. It's updating the IK retargeter. That's for the live retargeted characters. I'll get to that later. And then right here, it's making sure that there is a valid action data set for this. And if so, then it will grab the linked enum layer class if it's valid. It'll set it to the current linked enum class, and then it'll set it. If not, for whatever reason, then we'll go ahead and unlink whatever enum class layer is currently linked. That way it's not just sitting there in on the animation graph. This right here is using, well, not that. Inside of here, it's using a blueprint interface. I'll get to that. Let me just go ahead and cover the rest of this. So on the IK retargeter, what it's doing is it's getting this live retarget setting information. And you can find this right here under variables, DAO, live retargeting, right here. And this is set on your live retargeted character. And this is a data asset that allows you to offset the hand position and angle so that he's aiming towards the center of the screen. And as you can see here, that for each stance, for this weapon, for each stance, we may or may not need to change the way he holds it. And the reason why is because if you remember earlier, when I selected this character, I forgot to do it on her. And so when I am in this state, you'll see that her hand comes off the rifle. But if she's aiming, you'll notice that it's on the rifle. And the reason why is because anatomy, and because this is live retargeted. If you were to hard retarget this, whatever offset you see on here would be the exact offset you would get on your retargeted animations. So live retargeting, what you see in the live retargeter is basically what you're going to get if you did a hard retarget. The only difference is that on a hard retarget, you can actually modify the animations and bake it like that. And on the live retargeting, you just change that stuff in real time. And that's basically what we're doing here, is we're just offsetting their hands using IK in real time so that they're holding the weapon properly. Now, it looks like the gun is offset in her hand, and that must have been something else I overlooked. I must have never even checked her whenever I was doing this stuff. And so I'm just going to go ahead and show you guys how that stuff works, and then I'll go back into the character blueprint and explain this stuff right here. Because it's going to be hard for you to understand this stuff if you don't understand what's going on here. So if we go to the class defaults here, and we go under DAO, live retargeting, and we go under the pistol state, actually no, the rifle state. So this is the rifle information, and these are the data assets right here. And this is her held object offset data for the M4A1. And so you'll see that's stored under each element that's added to this held object state or map gets its own held object offset. And so if I just open up that and I open up the ready game stance data asset, and I go back in here and I equip the rifle and I eject, and I come over here to the held object data, I can drop this in her hand. And I don't know what caused all these offsets, because I thought I fixed all that. I was pretty sure I did. But obviously I didn't. I probably did fix it, but I think I had to lose all that data, and I had to go back in and redo all of it like 2 or 3 times, I think. And somewhere along the line I lost it. I just forgot to redo it for her. But that's okay, because you'll get to see me actually fix this in real time. And so this is the ready stance, but we want the aiming. So the live retargeting, LR, stands for live retarget, and this is M4A1. This is the aiming state. And so you'll see some stuff here. I'm not worried about the aiming. The aiming is spot on, but I want to bring her hand in more. And now when we do this, don't use the static offset. And the reason why is because if you add a static offset, it's going to be different whenever she's aiming up than if she's aiming down. If you bring her hand straight back using a static offset and you aim up, then it's going to have her hand come back. It's going to offset her hand back from wherever it should be, and it's going to be in the wrong place. So even though it's a little annoying, we have to use the static local offset, which is local to the actual wrist and how the wrist is pointing. And so up would actually be in this direction, and down would be in this direction. So you can see as I move this up, her hand goes down. And actually that looks fine. That seems to have done it. So yeah, I'm just going to leave that like that. And then I'm going to put her in this other state. And obviously I need to fix this. And this is the ready state. So on this one, I need to give her hands an offset, and you'll see I didn't do that in here for some reason. But if I move this down, her hand goes this way. And moving it up makes it go forward. Something like that. It's perfect. So yeah, that's basically it. So you'll see that her finger looks a little funky. So in order to fix that, I'm actually going to have to break it. And whenever I do this, it's actually going to break it, guys. And I'll have to redo all this stuff all over again. But let me just go ahead and do that because this is a repository and I can always undo that. But this is something you need to do ahead of time when you're bringing in your character. So if you, let's see, if I select your mesh right here and I browse to it, under the UA5 mannequins folder, rigs, live retargeting, actually rigs. Yeah, live retargeting. You'll see that she has her own IK retargeter here. And if I open it up, it looks like I not swapped. Oh, I didn't swap that out. That's why I'm having these problems. Let me show you how to set up the live retargeter. Under let's see. Yeah, under live retargeting, refs, you'll see we have an IK retargeter, and that's where it's being set right here. And if you browse to it, you'll see it's right here. And this is the actual, and it looks like I didn't actually fix this. That's why things are off on her. So you'll see that her hand is offset, and that's not good because we were actually offsetting her hands manually from inside of here. We do not want the IK retargeter to offset her hands. So first of all, we need to swap out the mesh for her mesh. So under root asset settings, we need to swap out let's see. We actually need, well, this will probably work on her as well, but yeah. We should be able to share the IK retargeter, or the IK rig, I mean. We just need to swap out the actual skeleton. So I'm going to swap it out with the Quinn Simple. And you'll see there she is. Now I'm going to select her left arm and I'm going to zero this out right here. And I'm going to select her right arm and I'm going to zero this out as well. And now with those zeroed out in her base pose, I'm going to go to running retarget. I'm going to go to source. I'm going to select the pelvis. I don't do the root because I have seen it do some problem. It's caused some problems with some characters doing that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to match the UEFN pose. I'm going to match the UEFN's pose to her pose. And what that's going to do is it's going to make sure that we don't get any funky finger bending or limb bending, because their pose will match as close as possible. And the reason why, just so you guys know, I did do a video on this, and I might put a link down in the description if I remember. But an animation is stored as an offset from this pose. So when you retarget an animation, it's going to offset it from the pose that the character from the source that you're getting the animation retargeted from. It's going to offset it based off of the angular offset of that bone on that specific frame from this character's base pose. And so if your character is in a pose like this, if it's in a T pose, then it might actually rotate her arm up like this if this arm rotates up like that. So, of course, since this is a pretty sophisticated system, it's going to translate it probably okay-ish, but it's best to have the poses match as close as possible. I just wanted to get that across to you. So you always match the source pose to the target pose. Do not match the target pose to the source pose. The reason why I don't do that is because if I do a hard retarget on these animations, so I bake them to this other rig, now I have to change this rig's base pose in order for those animations to play properly on it. So if you just change the source and match the source to the target, then you don't have to worry about that. It's just good practice. So now that we've done this, we'll go back in here and you'll see that she's suddenly not aiming properly anymore. But that's okay because it gives me a chance to show you guys how this stuff works. And you'll see that she's actually holding the weapon sideways. But in actuality, it's not the way she's holding it in her hand. It's the angle her hand is at. And the reason why is because her anatomy is different. And even though that we matched the poses as closely as possible, there's still anatomy differences that are getting in the way. And that's what I told you guys before, is you cannot, when it comes to precision, you cannot retarget animations precisely. Guys, you cannot retarget them precisely. You're going to have offsets like that. For regular animations where precision isn't a factor, like vaulting or mantling or something like that, it might be okay. But whenever they're aiming a weapon, it suddenly becomes a problem because their hands have to be in a very specific way in order to hold it. And if the anatomy differs too much, then there will be problems. So I'm going to go back into this character here. I'm going to stop it. I'm going to save this, and I'm going to close that. And I'll show you guys, if we browse to here, if I would just duplicate these guys and assign them to your own characters, but you can always create these data assets like this. So if you open this up, you'll see that the parent class is PDA live retargeting. Okay, so I'm going to create, I'm going to go to miscellaneous data asset, and I'm going to select my primary data asset for this, which would be PDA live retargeting. I'm going to select that. And there you go. Now you have a new one. You can come into your character, go to class defaults, and you can assign that right here under the value object right here. I might change the name of that later so that it's more obvious what that requires, but if you just pull this drop down, it's not going to let you put in the wrong data asset. It's only going to let you put in a live retargeted primary data asset type. So it's not really that big of a deal. So I've already actually created those assets for her. So I'm just going to dock this over to the side. And she's already holding the weapons properly, and I showed y'all how to do that. So now we're just going to modify the way she holds the weapon. First and foremost, I want to straighten this gun out so it's not tilted to the side. So what I'm going to go and do now is I'm going to go into the LR-M4A1 aiming, and I am going to undo that rotational offset right here. And now you'll see that she's actually holding it accurately. The reason why I had to add that offset before may have just been because I wasn't matching the poses between them. And now I don't need that because their poses match and she's aiming straight. In some cases, you'll still need this. You'll still need to rotate the hand like this. So just let that be known. On one of them, I actually ended up having to rotate it 25 degrees. And it made zeroing in on these values right here a little bit difficult. Now this is where my debugger comes in, and I'll cover how that debugger works here in a little bit. But you'll see that the blue is pointing straight down the barrel of the rifle, whereas the green is pointing towards the center of the screen. And you'll see these numbers popping up here. So I'm going to pull up this output log that I've docked over here. And if you want to open up a second output log, because normally it's open down here and you can't undock it or move it or resize it much. So I like to dock them off to the side for this purpose. I'm going to clear my log because it's going to load slowly if I don't. Under window, let's see. I guess you check this output log right here to open up a second output log. I thought there was another way that you could open up like multiple in here, like you can with the content browsers, but maybe not. Anyway, so that's how you do that. So I'm just going to click on the screen, and then I'm going to press Shift F1 to release my mouse, and you'll see these values here. And so we want to rotate these in the opposite direction of what it's showing here. So it's showing that it's off to, the left, for example, 1.55. So I want to subtract that negative value, which will make it positive. It inverts it. Always subtract it. You can manually do the opposite of this if you want. But like add plus whatever, but in order to not have to hold down Shift and press the plus button on my the plus equal button on my keyboard, I just do minus. I'm going to shoot it again, and you'll see we're already a lot more accurate now. So again, I'm going to copy that, and I'm just going to say minus the positive number. And really, this is accurate enough, but I'm just showing you. And then minus the negative number. And it actually made it a little worse. And so, if you want this to be as accurate as possible, down to several degrees of freedom, then you may actually need to do this a few times. And you have to be careful not to move from where you're aiming at, because where you're aiming at will dictate the precision of the aim. And that's just simply because I'm only blending between two poses for the aim up and down. But yeah, So it looks like that's probably about as accurate as I'm going to get this one, but I'm going to try it one more time. I've gotten this almost completely perfect before, but really it's overkill. You only want it to be you only want it to appear to be aiming round about the center of the screen. So I'm just going to stop there because that's really accurate enough. You can see the blue is right on the green. It's barely off. Now, if you aim up and shoot, you'll see that it is offset. Oh, you know what? I forgot to disable the breathing while I was doing this. Okay, sorry, guys. So something that's important for you to know, and I'll go ahead and show you this, is if you go under Blueprints, DAO, Data, Layering Data, no, my bad. Actions, Linked Anim Layers. You'll see this rifle linked anim layer and this pistol linked anim layer. Now, in the rifle one, you're going to go to the animation graph, anim graph. Oh, my bad. No, not that one. You're going to want to go into animation layers, expand this, and go into the overlay state. And then open up the overlay state machine and go into aiming. And you're going to want to disconnect this breathing additive right here. You always want to do that before you adjust the aiming precision. You'll see it'll do this if it's running. Just switch and then switch back. That part is unavoidable. If the game is running and you recompile the linked anim layer that's currently linked, it will break the link and you'll have to reload it. And so now I won't be chasing these numbers. So I may be able to actually get this more accurate now. Yep, there we go. Now you'll see that we have several degrees of freedom as far as accuracy. Don't spam your shots either because the recoil is still happening, as you can see. But now you can't even tell where the green is and where the blue is. Or, I mean, where the blue is. It just looks like a green line. That's because it's really accurate. So just don't forget to disconnect this right here before you start setting this up. Now, I have to do this for the pistol as well. But before I do it for the pistol, I need to fix the hand. Or do I? Yeah, it's almost still good. I guess that'll do. But you can fix the hand too if you need. Sometimes it can be a little frustrating getting the hand so that it's not sticking through this part, but not sticking through this side either. And actually, I guess I'll go ahead and show you how to do that. So in order to do that, you would have to rotate this. Let me see. You would have to rotate this out along the Z, sorry. Something like that. And I'm actually just going to set this back to -5 here. Actually, maybe even -10 is better, since she has smaller hands. And now that I've got that rotated somewhat, I can try to bring it back. And you'll see that looks a lot better already. So anyway, you can tweak that until you're content with it. Totally up to you. But yeah, so after you've done that, go into the ready state by pressing the right mouse button to not aim. And then you can adjust this part as well. That's the M4A1 ready. We adjusted that before, but because we changed the way that she was being live retargeted, we have to redo it. that would have happened too if you needed to retarget an animation. But yeah. Anyway, I'm not going to nitpick over little clipping problems. That's basically how that works, guys. So that's the technique that I use for live retargeted characters. It basically allows you to procedurally adjust it during runtime while modifying the game, or while modifying the game while the game's running. Man, I've covered a lot in this video. I know it's long and I'm kind of drowning on, guys. I haven't been all here the past couple of weeks. Okay, so now that you understand how that stuff works, you should understand that our LR held object settings, it's a map. On them, it's a map that holds an array of LR held object settings. From that map on the live retargeted character, based off of the current state that they're in, we'll grab one of these. So what I mean is, so the LR held object settings is actually a map with two entries. It holds the weapon states via gameplay tag. So you'll see held object state pistol, held object state rifle, and then each state has a set of stances, and it has a held object offset data asset. Each stance has its own data asset, which stores how the arms should be procedurally offset on the character, as I was showing y'all before when I was moving the arms. And what this does is, based off the state, it grabs, based off the state, it's going to either grab element 0 or element 1 here. It's going to grab this, or it's going to grab that, and then it's going to cache it right here. It's going to get the held object offset from that. And then, actually, I was showing y'all wrong. It's going to grab this, or it's going to grab that. Sorry. So after it grabs this based off of the state, if it's a pistol, it'll grab this right here. It'll grab the held object offset here. It'll update the held object offset based off of that held object data asset that's stored on them. And then based off the state, the reason why I do this is because not all states actually have stances. Not all of them have have linked anim layers like we have here on this one. And so because of that, we can either do this or skip it. So if it's a pistol or a rifle, what we do is we grab the stance associated with their current stance. And each stance holds a data asset, right? And that's what we're getting right here. We're getting the live retargeting primary data asset that's stored along with that stance. And again, this is another map so that we can look at the value quickly and easily. And if this is a live retargeted character, then we send these LR chain settings to that live retargeted character's animation instance. So for you to fully understand that, I'll have to explain it a little bit more. On our live retargeted character, on begin play, we call the parent begin play so that the parent begin play functionality fires. And then after that, what we do is we reparent the held object to our new skeleton, our live retargeted one. We attach it to the weapon bone or whatever, socket or bone, whatever you want to attach it to. And then we pass in that live retargeted mesh into this set IK retargeter function, which is on the parent. So if we click this, you'll see it takes us back to the parent, and all this is doing is it's just updating information. So it's storing a reference to that mesh. It's getting the animation instance from that mesh, and it's setting its IK retargeter settings. Well, it's setting its IK retargeter, and then it's updating its live retargeter settings with the current chain settings for it. And so if we go back over here to the live retargeted character and we select the skeletal mesh, you'll see it has a generic animation blueprint, which they all share. So if we go under blueprints, retargeted characters, you'll see this animation blueprint right here. If we open this up, you'll see these are the two things that we're firing. So for this one, it's just setting the IK retargeter, which gets used on the anim graph right here. It's bound to this variable. So if we go to the details, you'll see that we can bind it. That's what we bound it to. We bound it to this incoming IK retargeter. Previously, they were using tags and grabbing it from a map right here. I don't like that method personally. I wanted it to be more obvious where things were, which is why under the class defaults, live retargeting references, that's why we're setting it right here. So if you go here, and you'll see that we're passing in the IK retargeter to this. It's not passing in the value of this IK retargeter on the parent. It's passing in the IK retargeter that we set under the class defaults on this child actor. So this is the IK retargeter for this one that would be passed in through here. On this right here, this is how we update the chain settings. And so if chain settings don't exist, it gets those chain settings from the IK retargeter itself. The IK retargeter is this thing right here. So yes, these are the chain settings that I speak of. This stuff right here. So if we go back in here, and we open up, wrong one. We open up a live retargeting setting, you'll see that's what we have. We have the FK settings, and we have the IK settings and the speed plant. That's the reason why, is because I'm just storing these as chain setting variables, and then we just pass them in, rather than just only including the stuff that we need. Because in some cases, who knows, somebody might think of some genius idea where they can utilize this stuff right here in a very creative way. So that's the reason why I left it in here. So it'll get this stuff from the actual live retargeter right here if we do not set one. But if this is valid, then we'll get it, we'll fetch it from that. data asset. So with that said, that's how that works. And that's also how this works right here. So whenever we update our state, our held object state, whenever our held object state changes, we need to update those IK retargeting settings, and then we need to fetch the linked anim layer or the linked anim layer class from that action data as well, and link that anim layer class. And so that's what's going on in here, guys. It looks complicated, but it's really not that complicated if you think about it. So that takes us to the KD add-on stuff, which I've changed a little bit. We're setting the held object state. Only the server sets that. If you're playing standalone, if you don't need replication, don't worry, this won't have a negative effect on performance. The client during a single player game acts as the server. So right here we have our weapon fire that gets called on the server. Only the server can execute this. It's going to set the wants to aim, which gets handled from the animation blueprint. It lets us know if we should move into an aiming state. I'm not going to get into that, but I'll cover that in the next video. Right here, if we're in a fighting state, meaning that our held object state was set to unarmed fight, then we will get the action data. This is just a macro, a helper macro, just to make it look a little cleaner. And what we're doing is we're just doing the same thing. We're just getting the action data off of this. And if it's valid and we pass it in, we say, yeah, hey, this is valid. If not, we don't do anything. We cast to the action data fight, the PDA action data fight, which is a child of the PDA action database. And if this cast does not fail, if it succeeds, then we will perform a melee attack. On the melee attack, if they are not moving, if their velocity is less than 3 centimeters a second, and they can punch, meaning that they are not currently punching, then we will play a montage, a random montage from that action data. We'll get the action cooldown from that action data, and we'll set a timer by event. Well, we set can punch to false too, by the way. So what that means is that until this timer expires and this right here fires, they will not be able to perform another punch. This will return false until this fires. The sounds are stored on the montages themselves. So if you go and look at the montages, you'll see that the sounds are actually embedded in them. That's totally up to you if you do it that way. Some people asynchronously load sounds, and that's really not a bad idea either. It's totally up to you, but if you need it to happen at a specific time, then it may be better to embed it into the animation. Just know if you embed it into the animation and you're not async loading a soft reference of the anim montage, then the montage and anything linked to it will be loaded into memory. So right here, we're firing another blueprint interface function on our linked layer, the current linked layer of our animation class, which may be this, for example. So we're calling this function off the linked anim layer, and it's returning if it's ready to fire or not. The is ready to fire is dictated by the states. Whenever we're fully blended into the aiming state, we'll set that to true. As soon as we start blending out, we'll set it to false. And so if it is fully blended into the aiming pose, and we're not doing a traversal animation, then we'll set once to strafe to true, meaning that if they're not in strafe mode, camera mode, then we'll leave that camera mode and enter the strafe camera mode. And then we're basically just doing a cooldown here, or a delay, and then a fire. I may actually want to change this right here to be handled the way I'm handling it right here. And the reason why is because this delay actually happens when they press fire. And so they'll press fire and they'll have to wait this amount of time before the projectile is released. That's actually how I think KD had set it up. And I only recently realized that was a problem when I started setting this up for the melee attack. So I may refactor this here pretty soon so that it uses a timer much like what I'm using here. And I may just rename this to cooldown or generic cooldown or something. But anyway, we fire this basic projectile. And right now, you'll see camera-based projectile is disabled. If it's disabled, it'll just use the base aim rotation, which is currently replicated, but it's not reliably replicated, which means that, like, you know, I don't know, maybe every 4 frames or so, it'll update. So it's not something you can actually use as an aim offset. I came to find out later because I was using it as an aim offset. I replicated aim offset, but I found out this isn't appropriate for that. But you could just do this. I don't think, let's see, if we just use the camera rotation, it works the same. Yeah, so in actuality, it doesn't matter here, guys. But anyway, the held object is being fired from the muzzle socket location. We have a projectile offset you can add, which says, hey, extend this 5 centimeters forward. But since this held object's forward direction in relation to the hand is actually its right vector, we're actually using the right vector instead of the forward vector. And then we're just spawning a projectile. And that's where the Aimoffset debug tool comes in. It needs a location, an aim location, and aim rotation. And that's what we're doing here. This is the location it starts at, and this is the rotation that we're taking on. And so if this is enabled, and you can disable it from right here. So if you disable that, it'll stop drawing those things. You can also turn this to none, the draw debug type duration to none. But what it's doing is it's sending out a line trace from for the camera, and it's doing one for the weapon. Again, because the right vector is actually the forward vector of our held object for some weird reason, we're having to actually use the right vector. But think of it as the forward vector. We're trying to move a point forward in space. And then right here, we have two options. So you can either print out a solid angle or a 3-axis angle. And so if we check this right here, and then we fire the gun, you'll see it says we're 1/10 of a degree off. On this one, because I haven't fixed this one yet, you'll see that one's 2.4 degrees off. Right here, I'm just remapping the rotator so that the rotation matches our static rotation offset order. That way people don't get confused, because 2.45 is actually the Z, or 3.2 is actually the yaw, stuff, whatever. Anyway, I just didn't want people to get confused, so I remapped it. And that's almost it. And then again, we're just firing this. It's still called Weapon Fire Montage. I'll probably rename that later. There's still a bunch of stuff that needs to be renamed, and like in some cases I'm still using held object, but I actually moved over to the term action state. Well, I think I used the term action data for the actual data for the weapon. But I'm still using held object state on these variables and for the gameplay tags. So just so you guys know, in order to make this universally more flow better, I'll probably rename it held object state. Anything that says held object, I'll probably end up naming it to action. So action state, DAO.action.state, so on and so forth. Procedural offset hack. So this will require me to go a little bit into the animation blueprint, but I'll go ahead and do that anyway. So what this is so there's a naive approach that is prevalent throughout YouTube. If you go to hand placement or weapon hand correction or whatever on YouTube, you're going to find all kinds of videos where they're telling you just to pass in the socket location from your weapon and use that as an effector target on your animation blueprint for a 2-bone IK or a fabric or whatever. So it'll tell you just to pass in that and set it to world space. Don't do that, guys. Do not do that. It's the reason why is because locations and stuff like that of actors and socket locations and stuff like that, whenever you're getting that from a blueprint and passing it over, that's going to be updated on the game thread. Well, everything on this anim graph is updated on a different thread. That may not make a lot of sense to some of you, but what that means is that if you think of two trains, and let's say that the trains, even if the trains are moving at the same speed, but they're probably not. Let's say you have two trains, they're moving at two different speeds, they start at two different times. And so will those trains ever be lined up along the track if both tracks run side by side? No, they'll never be side by side. They'll never be in sync. And that's basically the same concept when it comes to the game thread and the worker thread, which the animation graph runs on. So what that means is that if you pass in a location here, by the time it gets it, it's an old location and it's already behind. So the train is no longer there anymore. It's somewhere else now. But you're assuming that it's still there. And so based off of latency, your hand is going to lag behind. The lower your FPS, the more your hand will lag behind. And it looks bad. Whenever you're aiming, you're swinging your weapon from side to side, your hand will visibly come off of your left hand will visibly come off of the rifle. So that's the reason why I came up with this method. I call it a procedural offset hack. And there's actually not much to it. But what I'm doing here on the get effector offset is I'm getting that socket location, but I'm making that socket location local to the virtual bone, which is where we normally use a virtual bone as an effector target. And so I'm making this local to that virtual bone. What does that mean? So if this held object is local to this mesh and I offset it 76, then it's 76 centimeters away from that hand. So what that means is that we have an offset which we can apply to the virtual bone on the animation graph, which will be accurate and not thread dependent. So it won't suffer from that lag problem because this is actually an offset. This is how far offset it is from the virtual bone. And so when we pass that in instead, then we can set this to bone space, use that virtual bone as the actual effector target, use that effector offset as the actual effector location. And what that does is it'll offset that virtual bone by this much. So that's what I'm doing here. And I'm just getting the anim instance and I'm passing it in through a blueprint interface. And on the anim or on the event graph right here, I'm just updating it. Actually, I'm updating it on a tick right here, but anyway, you can do it either way. You can do it as a one shot like I'm doing here, or you can do it from here and just have it do it itself from a tick. This assumes that this socket is valid, so it would actually probably make sense to do does socket exist? It probably makes sense to do this. And I'll probably update this so that it does it this way, just to make sure that the socket exists, or else it won't offset it. But anyway, that basically sums it up. So it was a long video and I covered a lot of stuff, but I'm pretty sure that I covered everything. So, known issues. So I am aware of that this interpolates pretty fast in some cases. That was by design, because a lot of people are always like, I want split hair second like speed. I want it to be extremely responsive, and so that's the reason why I didn't add interpolation to that. Maybe I can go ahead and go over that if it's, oh god, I did it again. So let's see. It's probably under the blueprint thread safe. So under the blueprint thread safe, the update aim offset node, you'll see that we have a should interpolate. And this is the left to right. And basically what you have to do is you can lower this angle. Right now I have it at 115, so it will not interpolate beyond 115. If you want it to always interpolate, then you can set it to 0, but maybe you only want it to rotate if it exceeds 90 degrees. And you can increase this interp speed or decrease it to suit your needs. If you need it to be faster, then set it to maybe 300. If you need it to be slower, then you could set it to 50. And so if I just aim now, it should be a little less fast. No, it still seems to be doing it. Let's lower this more. Yeah, now it's very visible. Yeah, so anyway, you get the point. And if you want to just refactor this and just do a straight regular interpolation, then you can. You'll see I have this note here, but a lot of people complained about this, so I provided an interpolation solution. But that basically covers that. I'm aware of the jittering problem. Like I said, that's related to the way that the offset root bone rotates. The offset root bone, in case you didn't know, it actually allows the root bone, which carries the entire skeleton with it when it moves. It allows that root bone to offset forward, back, left, right, and it allows it to rotate independent of the mesh itself, which means that this origin right here of this mesh is not actually the origin of the character. And so if you turn on these debug settings here, right here, then you can see that green circle, how it's leaving the blue circle. That is how far off we are from where the mesh actually is in relation to the blueprint. So we're actually leaving the capsule in some cases. And yeah. So actually there was something that I didn't cover. So, oh, never mind. It's related to the animation system. So I'll cover the rest of that stuff in the next video, guys. This was a really long video. I'll see you in the next one.